The data says this year started with New Year's Day. Obvious, I know. I couldn't help but start the sermon this way. Not just because I'm me, and I gotta make it funny, and I gotta troll Pastor Bear with the data. No, it's because the next day, Bear and Janice took me to the airport to start the adventure of a lifetime. A little over 2-month work trip to Whidbey Island. And while I was there, I watched the live streams as you guys started going through the life of David in the How to Be a Person After God's Own Heart series. And I learned that to be a person after God's own heart, we gotta be the image of God. And I'm gonna share 3 things about that today. The first is that to be a person after God's own heart requires making relationship with God a priority. David made it a priority to seek God out in a relational way, both in the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. In this, and in David's making it a priority to bring the Ark of the Covenant to as close to his vicinity as possible, as seen in 2 Samuel 6, we see the having a relationship with God part of being a person after God's own heart. This reminds me of the dance between the 3 persons of the Trinity of God that some of us read in Tim Keller's book, Jesus is the King. This having a relationship with God feels like a longing for us because it's something that God also has. This adventure of a lifetime to Whidbey Island, it required for me to make relationship with God a priority. There was no structure there. Just that it was Monday through Friday, 7 to 3:30, and I had a return date to come back because, I can't leave you guys for too long. But there was nothing else outside of that, and I had to make my own way. And I needed to seek God out for wisdom, for courage, for grace and favor and guidance. And even though I did not get it right all the time, it was good enough to, at work, get great insights on the data that I work with every day. And the data became alive. And I got great appreciation for the work that is done to maintain planes in the Navy. God also allowed me to figure out ways to bring Jesus into the workplace and have meaningful conversations with my coworkers about God and relationship with God. Outside of work, God allowed me to figure out a balance between resting and exploring the land around me. And I got an appreciation for the island's natural beauty and its history. And let's not forget that I made it an effort to plug into community of believers so that I could get more perspective to live by faith based on what God's data says. And my pursuit to be a person after God's own heart by fully being his image. Being a person after God's own heart is about being secure in who we are, who God says we are. We see throughout the life of David that David was anchoring his identity in who God says he is, both by the scriptural data that he had at the time and by the things that he was experiencing with God. And he had to face a challenge of being in the last of his siblings, birth order, and not having the greatest rank in the family. And we know this because in 1 Samuel 16, when Samuel invited Jesse and his sons to the sacrifice, that cover-up where Samuel was going to anoint the next king of Israel, David was not invited. And we also see that when he was figuring out the whole David and the whole Goliath situation, he had to deal with what his brothers thought of him. But his identity was shaped by the experiences that he had with God in the field. attending sheep. And we know that his actions were consistent in aligning his identity with who God said he is. Because when he was told that he would not be the person to build the temple, his prayer was a prayer of aligning his will and who he was with who God said he was. We see that Jesus also faced this challenge. In his ministry and his time on earth, he had to deal with what his family thought of him as he navigated his ministry. And we see throughout Jesus' life that he got affirming words from God. And Matthew's account says it in terms of what he got during his baptism as, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." Mark and Luke's account has this affirming word as, "You are my beloved son, in you I am well pleased." And we see this mode of operations of Jesus of anchoring his identity in who God says, who the Father says he is, both by the scriptural data and also by the things that he had been experiencing with the Father for the longest time. It probably felt like an eternity. While I was taking pictures at Whidbey Island, wrong one, God was reminding me about key elements that make up who I am, who God says I am, and his 2 cents that these things are good. See, I'm an analytical person, and I care about the data. I love sports and music. I'm interested in means of transport, which explains my career path. But I'm also a creative. I love taking a saying or an idea and bringing it to life in an artistic way. And what God was showing me, and what God has been showing me for the longest time, has been that to be a person after God's own heart, we gotta not ignore those key elements about us that God put there, and that these things are good, and that these things require stewardship. That it's not just about not ignoring these things about ourselves, but it is about embracing them fully. Because in that way, we will be able to be a person after God's own heart by fully being the image of God. And in that way, we will be able to fully thrive in the will of God. The third thing is that to be a person after God's own heart, we need to embrace our desire to create order out of the chaos around us, make the world around us complete in God's timing and in God's way. We know from the first 2 chapters of Genesis that God takes great pleasure in creating order out of chaos. David's start as king was this endeavor to make order out of the chaos left behind by Saul's administration. David made complete the worship side of temple proceedings by leaving psalms written out, by having people make musical instruments, by appointing a family to offer thanksgiving and worship to God. You know, David wanted to build the temple, and God said no, but that did not stop him from trying to leave things as ordered as possible before he died so that Solomon could finish the job. It reminds me of something that I heard Matt Diavella say in his video, 9 Ways We Keep Our Home Organized. I find something so satisfying about creating order out of chaos. To which I thought, you're created in the image of God, you know. When I heard the stories of the settlers of Whidbey Island subduing the land and allowing for both agriculture and animals to thrive, I was reminded both of this part of God's nature of creating order out of chaos and our original mission to subdue the land. These are some things that I picked up on this adventure of a lifetime. And I want to encourage you guys to see your whole lives as this adventure of a lifetime with the mission to be a person after God's own heart by fully being the image of God. And doing this by making relationship with God a priority, living in the assurance of who God says you are, and by taking the opportunities that God gives you to make order out of the chaos around you and making the world complete. God bless you.